Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with another box that's still around, and this is a really important one. It's Erato's Poulenc edition, the complete works, which of course isn't quite complete, but that doesn't matter. Most everything is represented, and certainly well enough. It's, I think, 21 CDs, 20 CDs. It's a bunch of CDs. Actually, 20 CDs for a complete works is not, well, it's 20 CDs, is not all that much. Poulenc was not the most prolific composer, but he was a very, very substantial one. And that may seem odd for some people to hear because Poulenc has a reputation of being frivolous and insouciant and not somebody who we always need to take seriously. But the reality is he deserves to be taken seriously as a major composer because what he did superbly well. And he's one of those composers who tends to be judged by criteria that he never attempts to fulfill. What I mean by that is, like, if you look at his concertos or his large works, people say, well, he wasn't so comfortable with, classical forms, and their things are patchy, and they're not, it's all nonsense. He doesn't try to follow any of those standard forms. He just does what he does. And that's what makes him so wonderful. Because if the mark of a great composer is having an instantly identifiable characteristic style and working within that style to create absolutely self-consistent masterpieces, then Poulenc was a great, great composer. There's just no question about it. He was one of the great songwriters of the 20th century, one of the great composers of choral music of the 20th century. His ballets and operas are magnificent and completely unique and unlike anybody else's. It's just fabulous stuff. And if it happens to be, his style happens to be something of a collage, it's a unique collage. I mean, it's based equally on Parisian street music, faux Mozart and classical music, very modern harmony, Stravinsky, Webern, and it's all mixed together. It's all just a giant mixture because his actual syntax was fascinating. It was like a mosaic. He put things together in little 2 and 4 bar phrases. And between those phrases, you could have any one of these styles. It could just pop up for a few bars and disappear. And it all hangs together. How it all hangs together, who knows? That's what geniuses do. It's inexplicable, but it's marvelous. Absolutely marvelous. And so I want to go briefly through this incredible set of discs. Most of the performances are very, very good. Most of them were made in the 50s and 60s under his own supervision or shortly following his death or somewhere around there. So he was at least involved in some of them, and he knew exactly what he was doing. The only thing that's a shame about this box is that it does not include his own performances of his own music, of which there's quite a bit, and it doesn't include every version of everything that you could have, or some of the mono recordings of the same repertoire, some of which are better than the stereo ones. But I'm not going to get into that because it's really an important and splendid set. I'm going to go through the booklet here, and I'm going to try and read it, which is not going to be easy because it's not, the print is tiny, but we got to do it. We absolutely have to do it. And so let's talk about how this is organized. It begins with piano and chamber music. And the pianist for most of it is Gabriel Tacchino, who's an extremely fine pianist in this repertoire. And he's joined by Poulenc's duo piano partner, Jacques Favier, here and there, who, of course, is to the manner born and has the style in his bones. And it begins with piano music. You get the Trois Mouvements Perpétuels, which was the first piece that brought Poulenc great fame. This is fascinating. This tam-tam is echoing to my voice a little bit, which puts a sort of sonic aura around what I'm saying, rather like the physical aura around my head here. So I'll just have to put up with it. Maybe I'll switch tam-tams eventually. Then we get his 8 nocturnes. These are gorgeous. They're absolutely gorgeous. They were written over a long period of time, but they create a cycle, a unified cycle. The last is marked as a coda to the cycle. And one of the things you notice when you listen to his nocturnes is that they reveal certain melodic, what you might call leitmotifs that just that he followed through his whole life. There are certain melodic turns of phrase that keep reappearing, that give his work an incredible unity. One of them is the motive that actually occurs at the very end of the opera Dialogues of the Carmelites. That's here in the nocturnes. And if you hear, there's this sort of Parisian ya da 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 da. That tune, it's like in almost everything he wrote. It's almost like the Dies Irae chant that Rachmaninoff used in just about everything he wrote. And the other tune that you hear quite often in Poulenc is some version of the old Snake Charmers song. Remember that thing? You know, da 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 da. You know, we used to do that when we were kids. There's a place called Mars where the lady smokes cigars, that sort of thing. That tune is in tons and tons of his music. It's just amazing. The more you listen to it, the more you hear the interrelatedness of all of these various works. There's his characteristic ending, which is, he'll have a very sunny tonal phrase, but it concludes in a foreign key with unexpected chords or on a dissonant chord or anything that's a little bit unexpected. His music is essentially Stravinskyan in that it's brittle and rhythmically sharp and unsentimental until, of course, one of those gorgeously sentimental tunes comes roaring in just to upset the apple cart. God, I love it. So after the nocturnes, let's see, what do we get? We get the Suite Française, which exists for piano and also in a version for wind orchestra. And we get the 3 novelettes and the 15 improvisations and, just all kinds of cool little piano pieces. Poulenc did not generally write in large forms. He generally wrote small pieces, miniature masterpieces that he assembled into larger sets. And so, one of the things that's fascinating about the way that he wrote, that mosaic-like style, is that it actually gives the impression of having a lot more in it than the time it takes to play. Because even though something may be only a couple minutes long, it has such a variety of material within its short phrases that it seems much bigger than it really is. And that's just another fascinating aspect of his musical personality. I mean, it's worth listening to all of it. I'm just saying, because it's so characteristic. If you like the piano music, if you like, certain things, the Concerts champêtre, you're going to like the operas, you're going to like the choral works, you're going to like the songs. It's all of a piece. And it's just wonderful to get to know him in depth rather than just, one or two of the more popular items. Well, let's see, what else have we got? We've got the Soirée dans Nozelle, which was a piece that he absolutely detested. That's another thing about Poulenc that's made his posthumous reputation a little difficult to assess. He was very self-critical. He was very neurotic, extremely neurotic. I mean, he was a wealthy, gay man growing up in Paris in the first half of the 20th century, basically. And he was always worried about money, even though he had lots of it. He was always very, very down on his own music, like Tchaikovsky was. And some of that was, I think, just affectation, and some of it was seriousness. But none of it needs to be taken literally by us, the posthumous generation, in evaluating how good the music was. I mean, he hated the Soirée dans Nozelle. Everyone else seems to like it well enough. It's a wonderful piece. So there's the piano music, and there's all kinds of cool stuff. Some of it you may not know. For example, Poulenc wrote one of the all-time great masterpieces for 2 pianos, his Sonata for 2 pianos, that he wrote for the duo piano team of Gold and Fisdale. And it's just a masterpiece and completely unique, like nothing else anybody wrote. So it's delicious. And let's see, here we have this theme and variations and Napoli. And, oh, my goodness. The Suite Française comes up about 20 times because he kept rewriting it. And then we get the chamber music, which is delightful. Now, Poulenc was not terribly comfortable writing for solo strings. I mean, he started a string quartet. He threw it away. It became his sinfonietta for orchestra. He did write a violin sonata. There is a cello sonata. They're wonderful works. But solo string music and even orchestral string music is somewhat rare in his output. He liked wind instruments. He liked their hard sonority. He liked their bite and their sort of tang. And he liked the hard sound of the piano, the percussive sound of the piano, even though, as I said, he wrote very, very lyrical pieces for the piano, and he loved to write, things in his performance instructions, things like swimming in pedal, lots of pedal, always lots of pedal. He wanted resonance and sensuality in his tone, which is just so contradictory. And these contradictions are what make his music so fascinating. So that's the piano music. Then we have the delicious trio for piano, oboe, and bassoon. Again, one of his earliest pieces, something he wrote after studying Haydn. The finale is one of the catchiest tunes in the entire universe. It's just once it gets stuck in your head, you'll never get it out. It's amazing. Absolutely amazing. And then you get his sextet. God, I love that piece. I mean, they're just wonderful. They're so delightful to listen to. They have an almost throwaway lightness to them sometimes, mixed with deep, deep sentiment. And you never know when it's coming. It's just a really remarkable personality. So we get all that chamber music. We have his clarinet sonata and his oboe sonata, and of course the flute sonata, which is one of the iconic 20th century works for the flute, and lots of little pieces. I mean, he wrote teeny tiny little pieces for odd combinations. There's a sonata for clarinet and bassoon. There's a sonata for horn, trumpet, and trombone. And these are wonderful pieces, just wonderful. Very, very brief. And then there's the orchestration of his Trois Mouvements Perpetuels. And there's, oh, goodness, I just love it. Okay. Then we get concertos, symphonic music, and religious music. Poulenc was a very, very serious Catholic. How he reconciled that with the rest of his life is another one of those contradictory things that shows up in his music quite frequently. So you have the piano concerto, which everybody dogs, which I think is wonderful. The opening tune is one of the most gorgeous, gorgeous melodies. I mean, da da dum ba da 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 dum da 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 dum ba 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 da 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 dum. It's just wonderful. The finale quotes Way Down Upon the Swanee River because it was written for an American commission. Needless to say, critics didn't get the joke and took it rather too seriously. Poulenc just called it a handshake. He called it "se shake hand," actually. And the soloist, again, is Gabriel Tacchino. This is still, with the Paris Conservatory Orchestra in Petre, probably the best performance of that ever recorded. The concerto for two pianos features Poulenc himself and Jacques Favier playing the piano, and it's not going to get better than that, for sure. The Concert Champêtre has Amy Van de Waal, it's a really fine performance. And it's one of the few that gets the sound of the harpsichord right because she's playing a Pleyel harpsichord. I mean, Wanda Landowska, for whom the concerto was written, played an enormous modern harpsichord with a huge sound and lots of bells and whistles on it. And that's what you need. Modern performances usually have two things wrong with them. First is that they're played by some period instrument schmo who's playing on a tinkly little 15th century something, which is inaudible and can't hold its own against the orchestra, although there is a piano version of this piece too, but it's better on the harpsichord. And, and they're too fast. They just play them too quickly. They play them with period instrument snappiness, which is oh so wrong. The greatest performance of the Concert Champêtre is the one on Superphone with Susanna Ruzickova and Kurt Zanderling, believe it or not, conducting the Czech Philharmonic. Now, they play it like a major, serious masterpiece, and that's what it is. And so do these people. It needs to take its time. You need to savor its wonderful, wonderful classicizing slash modern slash Stravinsky slash sort of pastoral harmonies. It's just such a great piece. But people don't give it the time it needs to blossom, I think, in so many modern performances. And then we have the orchestral version of the Suite Française for 9 wind instruments and percussion, and the Aubade. Oh, that's fabulous. Aubade is a ballet, which is also called a concerto chorégraphique. It's for piano and winds, and it's fabulous. By the way, almost all of these pieces make amazing ringtones. I have all of them on my phone, and I use them regularly. They're just great. Then we have the complete ballet Les Biches, which was Poulenc's first great theatrical success. There's also a wonderful suite. This performance with Georges Prêtre and the Philharmonia was an early EMI digital. The sound is just not great. It's one of those sort of hollow, I don't know how to describe it. There's just no body to the tone. It's not a bad performance. Prêtre was Poulenc's sort of conductor of choice. He knew the music very well. He played it with conviction, but he recorded an earlier suite from Les Biches, which isn't in here and should be because it's really a much better performance. There's also the suite from his other ballet, his least known ballet, The Model Animals, Les Animaux Modèles, which is a fabulous ballet. And they should have had the complete ballet because the complete ballet is just wonderful to listen to. It's a terrific piece. But the suite's here and it's quite good. And let's see, but then there's like all these little pieces, little tiny pieces that he wrote for various purposes. 2 marches and an interlude. And the 2 little bits he wrote for the complete work, Les Mariés de la Tour Eiffel. There's, let's see, the Matelot Provençal and Gnossienne number 3, which is Satie, of course, that Poulenc arranged. And then there's the organ concerto. Oh, I love the organ concerto with Maurice Duruflé and the Paris Conservatory Orchestra. It's sort of a big, somewhat blowsily recorded performance, but it's still quite good. The organ concerto actually sort of was more popular in the U.S. than it was anywhere else for reasons I don't quite understand, but it is a wonderful piece. It's part Bach, part Fairground, and that's just terrific. So then we get, let's see, this is religious music, the litanies to the Black Virgin and his a cappella mass in G major, which is gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. And then his Christmas and Easter motets, which are standard works. I mean, I sang them in high school, so, I mean, and in college. The Christmas motets particularly, which are 4 of the most wonderful pieces and not easy to do, because of that mosaic style of construction. You have the same fragments that keep coming back, but each time they're harmonized differently. And sometimes they're harmonized purely diatonically and sometimes wildly chromatically. And you recognize it's the same music coming back, but you have no idea what notes to sing it to. They're challenging. Let's put it that way. And then we have his Tenebrae responsories, which are glorious. And that was one of his very, very last works. I think it was his last work. It was actually a New York Philharmonic commission. It was premiered by Leonard Bernstein, if I'm not mistaken. And let's see, what else have we got here? The Gloria. Yeah, the Gloria and the Stabat Mater, which are magnificent. Now, these performances, I have to confess, under Prêtre have been surpassed. And they've been surpassed not because there's anything wrong with the conducting or the playing, but because French choral singing in the 1950s and early 60s, and most of the 60s, was an acquired taste, shall we say. These choirs were undisciplined, somewhat iffy of intonation, and they're just moments. I mean, particularly in like the Stabat Mater here, and it's not good. it's just not good. I guess it was okay for the time, but there's more enthusiasm than there is, I would say, accuracy of expression. But Poulenc was there for them, and he put up with it. So will we. Then we get the operas. Oh, the operas and theatrical works. How marvelous are these operas, and how different they are from one another. There are basically 3 big major works. And then a bunch of smaller ones that are really quite wacky and fun. But the big one, of course, is Dialogues of the Carmelites, one of the great operas of the 20th century, and one that has effortlessly inserted itself into the 20th century repertoire, into the modern repertoire. It's glorious. It's glorious, and I use the guillotine as my ringtone for text messages. It's really fabulous. And this recording, oh my God, with Pierre Dervaux conducting, is just amazing. It's the premiere recording. It's still the best. You've got Denise Duval, who was associated with Poulenc all her life, and Regine Crespin and Rita Gore and Denise Charley, and just this amazing cast of singers. And it's with the Pierre Dervaux conducting the National Theatre and Opera of the Opera of Paris. It's such a moving, incredible piece. And one of the things that you need to keep in mind as we deal with all of Poulenc's music with text, none of which is here, although you can find most of it, is that he was one of the most gifted and careful word setters. When his writing in whatever text he chose is so clear, so precise, he would agonize, sometimes for months, over just how to set one or two words of a poem or of his libretto. I mean, it was so well done. There's such a naturalness of declamation in his music. And it works no matter what language you sing Dialogues of the Carmelites in. He wanted it to be sung in the language of the audience. So like when they do it at the Met, they did it in English. And it's just remarkable how well the words come over and how appropriate the musical setting is. The music never gets in the way of the text. And he had this amazing feeling, really an amazing feeling, just for the sound of words. He liked interesting or unusual words, and he would highlight them. In the next opera, in his opera buffa, The Breasts of Tiresias, Les Mamelles de Tiresias, he has this, I mean, they talk about being in Connecticut, and boy, does he have a meal with the word Connecticut, or Honolulu. I mean, you find him just making great play with the sounds of syllables. He loved the sound of the words, and he makes it musical. That's the point. The music is not subordinated to the sound of the words. The music is the sound of the words. And that's what makes his operas and songs so splendid, just so remarkable and so unique of their type. So we have the Dialogues of the Carmelites, we have The Breasts of Tiresias, we have Les Gendarmes Incompris, and we had, of course, the other big number, which is fabulously done here. We have Yvon Printemps singing Les Chemins de l'amour. Les Chemins de l'amour. D'amour, toujours l'amour. You know it. You know the tune. And we've got, La Voix Humaine and La Dame de Monte Carlo. That's with Mady Mesplay. And La Voix Humaine, which is Denise Duval, The Human Voice. This is a monodrama for soprano and telephone and orchestra. It's just a tremendous piece where, she is the character. She has no name. She's on the phone with her lover, and they're breaking up, and she's having a nervous breakdown. And at the end, she strangles herself with a telephone cord. Or does she? We're not quite sure. Just an amazing piece. I saw Jesse Norman do it with the New York Philharmonic. It's a wonderful concert piece for soprano. And actually, it would be a great piece to put together with like Erwartung and some other solo works. Jesse Norman had her quasi-solo show where they did Erwartung and Bluebeard's Castle. It would have been better if they'd done this. But that's all right. Then we have La Bal Masquée, and L'Invitation au Château, and Sécheresse, which is it's only been recorded once. It's for chorus and orchestra in 4 movements, and nobody knows it. So it's cool to hear it here. I mean, it's hard to describe exactly what these things are without the text, because they are often based on sort of fauvist or absurdist or, crazy stuff. from Paris of the 1920s and 30s and 40s. Well, 20s and 30s. 40s was World War II. Things were a little more serious then. In fact, after World War II is when Poulenc wrote his opera Buffa, and it flopped big time because people were in no mood for an opera that told the people of France to have more babies because they have too few after the war. But now we can just enjoy it for what it is. And then we have some of his choral works, which are remarkable, secular choral works. Figure humaine, which is one of the great choral works of the 20th century, on a text by Paul Éluard, a poet who Poulenc got along with quite well in terms of text setting, and Un Soir de Neige, and the Rhapsodie Negre, the Bestiaire. These are all wonderful, wonderful pieces, often for solo or small groups and small, quirky ensembles of instruments. I can't go into them in detail, but they are amazing, amazing pieces, and just so worth getting to know. And then we get to all the melodies, all the songs. The songs are, like I said, the greatest songs since Schubert, along with those of Fauré. I mean, the French really took over songwriting from the Germans. Sorry, Hugo Wolf. I think the French stuff is so much more interesting because the poetry is so much more interesting. But that's me. That's me. I'm not going to get into it. But some of these song cycles, like Tel jour, telle nuit, I'm looking at right here, which is extraordinary, and Cocarde and Banalité. I mean, they're these little song cycles. Many of these songs are less than a minute long or less than 2 minutes long. They are miniature masterpieces. And it's just, the poetry is easy to find if you need to find it, because most of it's really seriously well-known poetry. I mean, Poulenc had exquisite taste in selecting his texts for the most part. And it's great stuff to work your way through. There are, by the way, some very, very fine complete song editions. There's one on Hyperion. There's one on Atma. So it's not hard to get them separately. And you should hear different performances of them. Most of the ones here were from that wonderful, wonderful EMI edition of French Melody that had, Elie Ameling and José Van Damme, and then, just wonderful singers. They're also superbly done with Dalton Baldwin at the piano, for the most part. And that, my friends, let me see if we got more here. Is there anything I've left out that we need to discuss? Not really. Some of the secular choral works, like the drinking songs and the French folk things, are in here too. And they're just great. It's just a tremendous legacy. And it's still available. That's the point. On 20 CDs. I was surprised to see it, quite frankly, because it had been issued originally in 4 separate boxes by EMI, by French EMI, which is still run by Alain Lanceron, which is kind of fascinating. One of the great survivors of the classical music industry apocalypse. Apparently, he's still there running the French thing. I guess he's kind of like the Charles de Gaulle of the record industry. The French go their own way. And so this is still around. And I'm thrilled that it's still around. Get it while you can. If you don't have it, it's a real collector's item. It's a major, major chunk of 20th century music by a major figure who deserves, I think, a lot more credit for being a genius, one of those true originals than he usually gets. But keep on listening, folks. Get your Poulenc and just have a great time. Take care.